All right, I'd like to call this meeting of the West Milwaukee School Board to order. Mr. Keller, would you please lead us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call the roll.
Yeah. Ms. Deal, here. Mr. Sikich is excused. Mr. Keller,
Here.
Mrs. Carr, here. Mr. Ustruck,
Here.
Mr. Burns,
Present.
Mrs. Justin is excused. Mrs. Kaiser, here. President Lee.
Here. Proper notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the open meeting laws of the state of Wisconsin. Are there any modifications to the agenda this evening?
We have no changes this evening.
Okay. All right, well, let's move right into the superintendent's report.
Great, thank you and good evening and welcome everybody. So we'll start with our update on returning to in-person learning. And today we're going to spend a little more time talking about some of the work that's been going on the academic side. So a little bit more of that, given some of the feedback we heard a week ago, just the concerns that, student achievement is lagging, and we know that. And so there've been some very intentional work. So Dietrich will talk us through some of that. And we still know we got a long ways to go. It's not going to 2 years of what we've been through is not going to get fixed in 6 months, but we can get there from here. So with that, so a little bit of our agenda again, just the guiding principles, the health metrics, focus on student achievement, a little bit about next steps. Again, safety and well-being, learning that works, which is the majority of what we'll talk about in this update. Being responsive and flexible, and is it practical to implement some of these things? So the external health metrics continue to improve, and so we've changed categories in terms of the color coding as of February 22nd. This is the February 22nd data are not in the health metrics dashboard yet. I actually received this about 15 minutes ago from the health department. So I got it into our presentation for this evening, but I'll go back tomorrow and put it in the actual health metrics dashboard, but it's all encouraging. It's going in the right direction. That's not up to date. What happened? Hang on. So, all right. So where we are. Last Friday, the 25th, we had on Friday of last week, we had 2 students in quarantine. That was it. 2, no staff.
Wow.
And our percent point, or that's the 14-day percent positive. So 0.08. And so we're again, staying below the 1%. So I think that's encouraging. The impact of not wearing masks, we won't know for a while. This is just a few days of that. So you can't draw any conclusions. But anecdotally, what I've observed of lots of kids and lots of staff are still choosing to wear masks, which I think is great. And so now it's optional, but kids are still choosing it. And after 2 years of having a mask on, I will say Tuesday morning when I got off the elevator, I turned around and started to go back down to my car because I forgot my mask. And I went, oh wait, I have the option now because it's so ingrained into the way we've lived. So we're going to continue to watch this, and we watch it school by school because again, the threshold that the board set was 3%. We would go back to mask wearing and then again quarantining for close contacts. So going forward, I'll turn it over to Deidre just to talk about kind of where we are in our progress. And again, this is not the entire story. There's still a lot of work to do, but just so that the board gets a little more background on some of the work that we have been focusing on that just hasn't come into the board floor until now.
Good evening, everyone. So next couple of slides, again, like Marty shared, a little bit of it is, this is the time where we do our AGR mid-year checkpoint. And then we included some other pieces from different data sources that we collect. But I started with the school report cards because those also got mentioned last week. And we started, the first year I put on this chart was 16-17, and we had 1 school and significantly exceeds. Then it goes all the way down with 2 schools that are in that red category of fails to meet. 17-18, we had made some nice progress. We didn't have anybody on fails to meet. 18-19, again, we were trucking along, moving. That was 17, 18, and 18, 19 were the first 2 years we really saw some of the movement around the goals that we had seen within our strategic plan. And you can see the kind of results of that in 18, 19, was that we had 1 school in significantly exceeds, 7 schools in exceeds, 6 in meets, and then 2 still in few meets. Then in 1920, we didn't get school report cards by the state. And so these now 2021s are reflective of the forward exam and the ACT that the students took last spring, as well as it includes information around attendance rates, graduation rates, 3rd grade reading scores, 8th grade math scores. There's a compilation of things that go into those scores. So in our schools, we have 4 that stayed in the exceeds category, 8 stayed in the meets category, 2 stayed in the meets few, and then we ended up with 3 in the fails to meet. A couple of things to note about that. There's some difference between the number of schools reported in that chart as we go through. One of those reasons was 16, 17 was the last year we had a report card from Daki or from Lincoln, excuse me. So it dropped off. And then 2021 was the first year Daki actually received a color coded report card. So Shared Journeys and Daki in the past had always been eligible for the alternate report card is what it's called. And you just get a satisfactory or unsatisfactory rating. Shared Journeys has always reported a satisfactory rating. Daki had always reported a satisfactory rating. Last year was the first year that they were, or this year is the first year they were eligible for an actual report card. So they were one of our schools that ended up in the red, but partially that is they didn't have any growth to report because it was the first year they had received a report card. So now that we have students going to Daki from 9th grade onwards, we'll see a great difference in some of that scoring as we move forward. We're really confident about that. And then the other thing to note is these are a chunk of the score is based on attendance. And so attendance to school, we pay really close attention to. We work with families when students are non-attenders to school. We try to support our families as best we can, but really set the requirement that kids need to be in school. But the attendance from 17, 18, between 17, 18 and 19, 20 had some inaccuracies to it when we really dove into it. We've been working with Aaron in our enrollment center and Kevin Clark in our technology department to be sure those are corrected. Because as you look in the chart at the bottom, and I know that's super hard for you guys to read, but I'll kind of look at the top one. We went from 19.1% reporting as chronic absenteeism. So that's those multiple days out of school that meet the statutory requirement. The next year we reported 19.4, and then in the data that went to this current school year's report card, we reported 24.9. In our attendance, we were being pretty critical on ourselves, the way we took attendance during virtual, the way we took attendance during the school shutdowns, in a way that we are working on making sure we're just giving ourselves the grace that the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction allows around some of those things. We also found one data inaccuracy with the way graduation rates for students with disabilities were being reported. So we're working with the state and getting that one clarified. For our AGR data, our overall goal is to reduce the number of students in the high risk category. So we're using a new progress monitoring tool called FastBridge, as opposed to MAPS that had its kind of measurement tools. FastBridge has a tool that says college readiness, low risk, significant risk, or high risk. That's kind of how those are the categories it uses. So we set our goal in AGR over the course of 5 years to reduce the number of students in high risk by 10% each year. So that data includes the data that we're going to look at tonight, actually, though, does include students who weren't with us for a full academic year. So we have a couple of schools where I'll share some data where more students are in that high risk category, but many of the students that are in that high risk category are new to us and they didn't take fall data. They just took the winter data so far. So we'll see that continuation of their growth over time. And then just as a reminder, our AGR strategies are coaching, and we keep some class sizes under 18 in grades kindergarten through 3rd grade. Another thing to note about some of the data you're going to see is just that our testing window as FastBridge was new to us, and we certainly didn't want to administer a test at the first week of the school year. And we wanted to leave the window open long enough for teachers to be able to give the full assessment, was from September 22nd to October 27th. And then our winter test went from January 10th to February 21st. So some students tested at the tail end of October and then again in early mid-January. That's not a lot of time between those assessments. We test again starting on May 9th. So we have a couple of other pieces of data that we'll share tonight as well. Next week, each week I'll bring some just pieces of data from the different sources. So next week we'll look at some ALEX data so that we can look at how we're doing in math. And the number of students we now have taking high school level math when they're in intermediate school, which has grown quite a bit. So our AGR data that the board actually needs to get twice a year. This is the mid-year check. Overall, we'll show you that in kindergarten, we had 83 students who were identified in that high-risk category in math in the fall. We have 10 students who moved out of that high-risk category since the fall testing in that short window. In reading, we had 129 students in that at-risk category or that high-risk category, and we actually have more students who moved into the high-risk category. But again, some of those are students who are new to us, so we just haven't had the time yet to work with them. And then this chart, which I'll include in my next board update, also breaks it down school by school. So I'll talk about what we're doing to follow up with the schools at the school level as well. In first grade, we had 101 students in the high risk category. 23 students moved out of the high risk category in that window of time between fall and winter testing. 180 students were in that high risk category. Remember, these are just students in kindergarten through third grade. That's the only AGR data we collect. 13 students moved out of that high risk category. So that's that we're over that 10% in a couple of these grade levels that we were looking for. The second grade data, 11 students moved out of the high risk category in math. 14 more students were in the high risk category in reading. So we went back to some scholastic data to try to match up what's happening between the two things so that we can see where are those inconsistencies happening for students. And then in third grade, we had 3 students move out of the high risk category in math and 1 student overall. So some schools had more students move out of that high risk category. A few schools had students move into that high risk category. And so we're working with each individual school next on some of those. What are we doing to make sure we're catching some of those students who are seemingly creating more gaps as we go? Or are those students new to us, and do we have the right plan of support to help them move forward? Couple more slides for you. Our district-wide FastBridge data. So we've been reporting MAPS data to our board for years and years and years. And I think you all know you always see a winter dip, right? So you're expecting to see, you see fall scores that look somewhat like your spring scores. And then in the winter, you see this big dip in the scores. And in the spring, you typically see a rebound. So we were actually pretty excited that from fall to winter, we didn't lose as much traction as we had in other years with that similar winter dip. We don't love the fact that we don't have more students moving into that on track or low risk category, but the fact that we sort of held our own is actually okay at this point in the school year. So for math, 48% of our kids were on track or low risk. And then in the winter, 47% of our students, and this is kindergarten through 12th grade. So we have some students who take the assessment in 11th and 12th grade who are using the progress monitoring data for IEP goals and things like that. And then the reading is 45% on track, 47 in the fall, and then 45 in the spring. The scholastic usage, I included that in my last board update, so I'll just talk about that one briefly. For a district that is new to a particular resource, we got some feedback recently from our scholastic partners that the balance of what they're seeing in the coaching of what we're doing in the classrooms and the amount of time our kids are spending on the online program is similar to districts that just buy the online program. So they were really impressed at the number of minutes our kids are spending in the online platform. Some of that is in school, some of that is outside of school, some of that is in a variety of different places. So that's promising for us because this piece of data also really speaks to how hard our teachers have worked to implement Scholastic. We started the school year in the fall on the Scholastic benchmark, so another piece of data that we use, at 60% of the students reading below the benchmark, and that's in kindergarten through 5th grade. And now we're at 50%. So the fact that we've gained 10% of the students now reading at the benchmark grade level for this time of the year, right, for halfway through the school year is really a good sign. And our teachers have worked really hard to use the Scholastic resource that our district chose to give them to support them in the work and to make sure that we're able to address those needs in 4K through 5th grade ELA, and it's paying off. So we're seeing some nice results from that one. And then here's a couple of ways that our schools then turn around and use some of the data. So lots of words on this one, so I'll just summarize them for you. So each school has a school improvement plan. So Horace Mann had a few more students that actually moved into that high risk than we would like to see. So they went back to their doing a data dive around FastBridge. And then they started aligning professional development sessions for staff to be sure that they were aligned to then meet the areas that kids aren't seeing some of that growth in some of the data that we'd like to see. They've been doing a lot of work around independent practice and goal setting, and then conferring to make sure that we actually understand like what that data should inform as far as what we're seeing in the classroom. Walker, the team at Walker meets every 30 days as a whole staff to review their progress around their school improvement plans. And they have goals around reading and math that we talk about monthly as a whole leadership team, that they talk about at the school site monthly, that they talk about individually with teachers as part of their educator effectiveness evaluations, all of those pieces. So they have a really pretty tight knit process where the teachers give input into the goals, and then they own the process of whether or not the whole school is meeting those goals at the school site. And then Wilson has gone to a school-wide coaching model where all staff members are engaging in cycles of professional development. So as opposed to, bless you, one or two here or there, they are really engaging the entire staff in that process and kind of a shared ownership process. Wilson in particular took a ton out of that training we recently did around math wholeness. And they've really worked hard to start saying, okay, if that's what data is telling us, what is the root cause of that? And then how do we address it at the school site so that we're ensuring that all the students have exactly what they need? And that is our update for tonight. Sorry, I talked kind of fast, but that was a lot of information. Any questions for me on that section?
Can you get this shared to us just so we can take a
Yeah,
look?
you
Thank
bet.
you.
And I've been getting in a regular habit of including also those data pieces in my board updates to you and pieces of kind of what's happening with some of the resources that we have. So if there's other things the board is looking for and additional information, please just let me know, and I'm happy to include those in my board updates as well.
Okay, so then that brings us to the next steps, right? So we're gonna continue to monitor internal positivity rates, like I said at the beginning of this update. Continue the efforts to improve student achievement. That's, you know, why we exist. That's the purpose of the enterprise. And so getting that work back on track. And I think it's important that the board knows this point well, but given that, you know, there's members of the public, prior to COVID, we had moved from 3 failing schools and only 1 considered to be high performing based on the state school report card, to no failing schools and 8 that were considered to be high performing. And so, you know, the work we were doing has not changed. The unfortunate part, and I've shared this with teachers in some of the presentations, is we have to do the work all over again. As COVID interrupted that for us in ways that I don't think we were quite prepared to have to adjust to, but we're doing that now. And then we're waiting for some guidance on the health department, although since I put this together and this evening when I looked at email, they actually said, go ahead and you can unlock the drinking fountains, or bubblers as we like to refer to them. So those red caps will be coming off. They have to be flushed and you know, to make sure they're safe. And so we have a plumber on staff that'll do that. So this will take a while to get through all of the drinking fountains with one plumber, but that process will begin now. And so that's our return to in-person learning update. So in terms of 6.2, which is the legislative update, I'm not going to read all of the activity going on at the state level regarding legislation around schools, but I think it's worth noting kind of what some of the big ones are. So a lot of it is around charter schools or the parental school choice program. So removing income limits, removing limits to the numbers of charter schools. The tobacco legislation we think makes a lot of sense, and WASB supports that. There are a number of bills that were approved by both the House and the Senate and the Assembly in both houses. The Assembly list is focusing on information around cardiac arrests in schools among students, micro schools, which is a thing getting traction all over the country, reading readiness, which we've talked quite a bit about through the legislative updates over the months, gifted and talented programs, parental rights, which is a legislative movement that you see taking place in almost every state right now. Reorganizing Milwaukee Public Schools, we've heard quite a bit about. Again, there's a number of them on charter schools. On the choice income limits, like I mentioned. Pupil promotion, there's a legislation around substitute teachers. And the permitting process, face covering opt-outs, which maybe now with the latest CDC guidance isn't necessary. Crime reporting around schools, again, reading, testing, reading readiness, some legislation around kindergarten, and then the parental choice program again. So there's quite a bit to watch. We think a number of these pieces, if they're supported fully in the legislature, may face a veto by the governor, given kind of the direction they seem to be going. But a number of them probably will work their way through the process and become law. And then Evers did sign an executive order for a special session. And that is really calling a special session of the legislature for March 8th to take up his $1.7 billion plan to give Wisconsin, give all of us a tax rebate and then more money into education. And there are no federal updates at this point. Then in 6.3, Board of Education recognitions. First, finance and operations. Thank you to Mark Duff for all his work in our district while Caitlin was out. And tonight, both Mark and Caitlin are here for some of the big pieces that they've been working on in the transition. At Central High School, they'd like to recognize Carrie Hansen, a social studies teacher, and Nate Rice, counselor. They have put tremendous hours in preparation for Black History Month, specifically the dinner and celebration, which was an evening to celebrate Black excellence in our school community and history. From communication, great job to all of the schools who showcased to the board on Monday, February 21st. Appreciate you taking the time to come and share with our board your projects and how they connect to your goals. Also, thank you to Anna Hengel and Deidre Ray, who helped make sure that the students had pizza and activities while they waited for their turn to showcase. In athletics from Central, it's been an exciting winter athletic season with many accomplishments for our Bulldog student athletes. We were fortunate to see our cheer team perform in their first competitive season. Our dance team was fortunate to be identified to go to the All-Star Tour at Disney. Our boys and girls basketball team saw 3 student athletes, Trinisha Brown, Grayson Pritzel, and Najashi Tollfree, reach 1,000 career points during the year. Programs in schools that see 1,000 point scores, typically it's once every few years, if at all, and to have 3 in the same season is truly special. So kudos to the hard work of all of our Bulldog student athletes, coaches, and programs. We look forward to sharing more in the coming weeks as our winter season comes to an end. And then at Pershing, we are so #Pershing proud of our students who presented at our WAWM District School Board meeting on Monday, February 21st. Shout out to the following students: Jacob Smith, Richard Chafferdet, Jorge Diaz, Ari Bentoncourt, Emma McCauley, Jesse McCauley, Noel Huber, and DeAnthony Gatesky. Thank you also to their families for their support and flexibility. We also want to thank Kelly Holtz, Adrian Spangenberg, Kristen Pagenkopf, Brother Hosenbaum, and Nicole Ellman for coming to support our students. And then in 6.4, just some quick updates.
Marty, can I jump in and add one more to the district
Oh,
recognitions?
go ahead.
So I had the opportunity to volunteer at the solo ensemble on Saturday. It was hosted at Central High School, and it was the first time I had been able to attend the event and volunteer. And I just wanted to share with the full board. We'll put some more information in our district recognitions, as we had quite a few students qualify from our whole unified community to go on to the state competition, which was really awesome and amazing to see. And it was just a beautiful representation of our entire community coming together around our incredible music program. I kept texting Amanda, like, why are we not filming this? Why aren't we putting more of this out there? Because it really was amazing and beautiful. So if you see one of our music educators who were there for the entire day on Saturday, dedicating their time for our students and our whole community, please make sure you thank them, as we intend to do as well.
Cool. Thank you. And then 6.4. So first response to some of the public comments at a recent meeting. So on February 14th, we heard from 3 members of the public. 2 spoke about mask wearing requirements, and 1 spoke about James and the Giant Peach at Lane. And we appreciate that feedback and the recognition of the work our teachers and students are doing in the performing arts. And then on February 21st, during a special meeting that included a section for public comments, we heard from 18 members of the public. All spoke in favor of changing our mask wearing requirements. The comments also included concerns about mental health, ability to see full facial expressions, student achievements, which we just addressed in part, and we'll continue that in our return to in-person learning presentations. And they mentioned that our internal health data continue to be low in terms of percent positive and percent in quarantine. So at this meeting, the board did make mask wearing highly recommended but not required. And we dropped quarantine requirements for close contacts. So we still have quarantine requirements in place for those who test positive and those with COVID-19 symptoms. And then if a school reaches 3% positive, the masks will again be required. And like I said earlier, I think the good news right now is many students and staff continue to wear masks, even though they're optional. And then and the other big piece that we're working on, so referendum communications is now ongoing and in full swing. We recorded the videos. I reviewed them today. They look great. So those are ready to roll out. Those should be released this week. The first hard copy mailer is also set to go out, and that'll be community wide, similar to the survey. So that is 60,000 addresses. But I think it's important that, if the referendum passes, there's parts of this that I think we need to focus on, because I think it really will be an opportunity for our community. So it not only provides our students and teachers with a modern high school building, but it's also the opportunity to come together as a community. And, we hear a lot about, the East versus West dynamics or the Hale versus Central dynamics. And there have been different schools over the years here in the West Dallas, West Milwaukee School District. But moving, to one high school and being able to celebrate all of the high school students in one place for athletics and for solo and ensemble and for performing arts, I think really is an interesting opportunity to bring us together. One of the common concerns has been transportation. And so I'm going to repeat this many times. Our commitment is that no student will ride a bus longer than they currently do. Right. So that means we're going to have to spend more money on transportation. But by making that commitment, so there's not going to be a new burden on students that have to travel further. They're just going to have expedited routes that get them to school. And we're also committed to adding after school transportation for high school students. So that it would be a kind of an early after school bus somewhere around 4 o'clock for clubs and activities. And those students need to get home, and then later for athletes. And the plan is that they would get dropped off at the elementary school nearest their house. So it'd be a routing between the elementary schools, and they could then walk from there. That adds a cost of about $500,000 per year for both the daily busing and the after school busing. But with operational savings of $2.5 to $3 million per year, we can afford to add the additional buses and after school transportation. So I think it is worth highlighting that. It's just a really unique opportunity for our communities to come together and enjoy all that comes with the modern, efficient high school building. So as you're, and thank you to board members that are doing them, the tables and passing out literature and answering questions. I think that's, another opportunity to highlight the idea of actually having a community that starts to feel as one community around its high school. Could be a pretty exciting time for us. So with that, that concludes the superintendent's report.
All right, thank you very much. So we'll move on to item 7, which is public comments. Before we begin, as a reminder, each person will have 3 minutes to address the board. Please state your name and address before beginning your comments. The board cannot respond to any questions or comments that you make, but if there is a response that is required, you will have that either personally or publicly by the next regular board meeting. If there's anyone who is watching online via Zoom, there is a link in the chat for signing up for public comments if you'd like to address them, and I will call the public comments in the order that they have been signed up. So we'll start with the first one, Mary Cool. I apologize if I say anyone's name incorrectly.
No, it's cool. Good evening. My name is Mary Cool. My address is 17834 West Roosevelt Avenue, New Berlin. Most of the time I reside at Nathan Hale High School. I'd like to start by thanking all of you for your time, dedication, and hard work for our community, families, staff, and most importantly, our children. I'm here tonight to ask you for your support for the early retirement proposal. This is currently my 33rd consecutive year teaching in our amazing district. I was hired as a teacher in the West Dallas West Milwaukee School District in 1989. I was hired when the 85 early retirement rule was in place. This meant that if I taught for 30 or more consecutive years in our district, I would be eligible for early retirement benefits at age 55. Because of this and my love and dedication for our district, I did not take one day longer than my 6 weeks after the birth of each of our 3 children. I didn't want to break my consecutive years in the district, making me ineligible for the 85 rule. This is time I cannot get back. I didn't take FMLA when my father was ill because I didn't want to break my consecutive years in the district. This is time I can never get back. I taught for 22 years in our great district, knowing that I had only 8 more years until I met the consecutive years of service portion of the 85 rule. During this time, I also passed up many opportunities with other districts because of my passion and my allegiance to our district, along with the promise of the 85 rule. It was in 2011 that the administration at that time put together a phase-out plan that took away early retirement. We were only one of a few schools in the state that took that promise away. And with the other few that did, most have reinstated it, including MPS and Wauwatosa. This plan only considered age and did not take years of service into account. This left a very small group of us that had been included in the 85 rule out. Since then, I have watched many of my colleagues in this district who were hired after me with less experience retire with full early retirement benefits, including 2 of my long-term subs for my maternity leaves. Even after my husband's organ transplant almost 3 years ago, I decided not to take FMLA, but rather continue my allegiance to our district and my dedication to our students, even without this promise. Supporting the early retirement proposal could save our district almost $1 million. Over the past 33 years, I've built
10
countless
seconds.
positive relationships with families, students, and the community, and this will continue. I'm looking forward to being a positive influence and in continuing to proudly promote West Allis, West Milwaukee School District, which I love, and I'm asking you to honor that promise and vote to support the early retirement proposal. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Lisa Kala.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lisa Cola. My address is W226 South 9373 Ripplebrook Court, Big Bend. And like Mary, most of the time you can find me at Shared Journeys. So good evening. I am here to ask your sincere consideration and support in the proposal for the early retirement designed for teachers and at-will employees who have diligently dedicated their time to our amazing school district. You see, I fall in the very small category of employees who began their careers in our school district in 1989 and who were initially offered to retire using the rule of 85 when we signed our contracts. However, in 2011, after Act 10, the school board at the time decided due to age, we were no longer able to retire using that formula. This early retirement proposal supports our strategic plan, which states that through collaboration, we will create and implement a new compensation system that is equitable, competitive, and financially sustainable. If done correctly, it can save our district anywhere from $400,000 to $900,000. As a school district, we worry about retention of staff. Having an allegiance to staff that has dedicated their careers to our district by supporting this proposal shows everyone that staff is of value and that you do believe in building respectful relationships and that you honor employees for their work and dedication. With this long-term employee group having the ability to retire on a positive note, it will in turn create a strong force of willing volunteers, mentors, and positive representatives. As a veteran group, we have watched educators leave our district after Act 10. We stayed. We have watched educators who had less years of experience and less years of service than us, who we welcomed into our district as new teachers, maybe even mentored, retire with full benefit packages because they met the required age. We cheered them on, we congratulated them, and we stayed. Through the years, as an educator, I have been offered many other employment opportunities. While they were highly considered, I always ended up declining the offer because of my passion and allegiance to WAWM. To me, it simply would not make sense to leave a place that I love. I am hopeful that you have the same allegiance to us. In closing, we will all retire at some point, and it's just a matter of how that looks. It is important to remember that positivity truly breeds positivity. I believe that is why many surrounding districts have kept or reinstated early retirement for their employees. I am hopeful you will consider my personal request to honor the early retirement proposal. I would willingly support the new educator who will be in my very unique role and continue to promote our school district through the 50+ community partnerships and the many relationships I have built through the years. Proudly, with 33 years of employment in the West Allis West Milwaukee School District, growing up in West Allis, being a product of this district, this would undoubtedly
10
be
seconds.
appreciated and welcomed. It would no doubt show the staff and community at large that you do truly value veteran employees and all employees for that matter. Ultimately, it will show that you back the strategic plan, which is built on the core values of trust, integrity, and respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Steve Broadwell. Don't see him here in person. I presume he's on Zoom. See it, Steve. Brandon, can you switch the audio over?
There, how's that? Can you hear me now? Hello? Oh, come on. Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Very good. Steve Broadwell, 12965 West Ohio Court, New Berlin. I'd like to thank those of you that voted to remove the mask mandate. It is incredible that two of you continue to beat your chest and put on full display your virtue signaling, that you somehow care more for everyone than the rest of us, even in the face of all the moms' personal stories of how this is ruining their kids. Noah, science, or rather your junk or political science, as there is certainly no real science behind anything you do, is not in your favor. The CDC knee jerks its way through life as it bends its knee, just as you do to the CDC, to pharma, and all the big money. Have you seen the recent admission that they have not released all data? They have, because they feel it might show the vaccine's ineffectiveness. Have you seen the CDC's relaxation of speaking competency standards for 2-year-olds in what many feel is a result of policies similar to those you have put in place for our kids? How on earth can you continue to follow such a compromised, corrupt organization so beholden to pharma? As I mentioned previously, all the other organizations you mentioned that have the same positions refer to the CDC's guidance for their own policies. Everyone is just fine with parents that want to continue to mask their own kids by continuing with this fearful, useless, and harmful approach to life. I was amazed by the number of videos district moms were posting showing the pure joy kids exhibited when they told them no more masks. Your infection percentage threshold discussion was as amusing as it was ridiculous. First, Marty said the 1.5% threshold is the best. Yes, that makes sense. Someone suggested 3%. Previously, it was 5%, which Marty admitted was arbitrary itself. You really made yourselves look foolish with your discussion about this percentage. No science behind any of it. Okay, what I just read was my email to the entire board last week. Now, no, I'm going to read part of your reply to me, and I quote, "I am shocked and dismayed at your utter inability to understand what science is or isn't, or even to have a high school level comprehension of how it works. I have attempted through many communications to impart some of this understanding to you. However, it is evident that I have failed. As I am not an educator, it is clear that I lack the tools to get through to you. So I will have to give up this effort and move on to more fruitful endeavors. As such, I will no longer be responding to your science inquiries and will direct you to the nearest Institute of Higher Learning." End quote. Thanks again, Noah, for yet another lecture. District parents have attempted through many communications to impart some understanding to you. However, it is evident that we have failed. So let me tell you once again, you work for us, not the other way around. That's it.
Miss Carolina Dietrich.
Thank you. I'm Carolina Dietrich. I live at 2500 South 77th Street in West Dallas. I want to say thank you for voting to go optional with the masks. I had a very moving moment with my son this week. He's 17, a senior in Central. And I heard him using an electric razor for the first time in a long time. And I asked him, hey, what gives? What's up? He said, because I don't have to wear a mask anymore, I can care a little more about my appearance. And that rocked me. So thank you, because that was something that I just didn't pick up on. And I'm glad that it was an unintended outcome, but thank you, because he's a handsome young man with those mutton chops. My daughter is definitely overjoyed skipping into school the first day without having to wear a mask so she could smile at all her friends and teachers. So thank you. I would like to address the proposal for the early retirement for the teachers. It makes sense to families and the other citizens in the community, not just to the teachers. Us parents and other community members have shared with me, it's important to recognize that commitment. 30 years, that's impressive. These people are sticking around in a district longer than some marriages last. It's important. It's a big deal. And I've heard throughout the couple of years where I've been paying attention to the district is that some people are concerned that West Dallas, West Milwaukee schools is a stepping stone for teachers to go to another one. If we could like close that gap and be like, early retirement's available to even the 25-year-old that come right out of college and they're doing their first few years, why give them 10 years to play the field? Get them in here. Get them early and keep them. That would be an excellent way. I know we want to right size the faculty down to meet the needs of the smaller student body number. And if student body increase is not a goal of ours, that's okay. But I'd like to keep the teachers that we have. So not only are the ones that we've had deserve to be able to retire early because of the renege that happened in 2011, I think even the newer teachers that are still getting their foot in the door, they need to have that commitment from us that if they stick around long enough, we will take care of them. Why hold the last 10 years of their career ransom before they have a chance to retire? They have to be in their 60s, but they'd be 40 years in. It's not fair. It's not right. And I think we should not have to cookie cutter our way through everything and every decision like every other district does. Why not make a decision for our own selves and our needs in our community? We need to keep the teachers that we have with the right
10
sizing
seconds.
and be able to honor the teachers that committed to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Rhonda Jones. Who I
Hi.
only believe is on
Yep. Hi,
Zoom.
my name is Rhonda Jones. I live at 1457 South 86th Street. First, I'd like to thank those on this board who agreed to lift the mandates for our kids last week. I believe that we can be headed in that right direction and hopefully we can move toward healing our kids that have been deeply affected by this. I want to touch on a couple of things tonight. The first being the 30-minute speaking policy that applies to general public comments at each of your meetings. I would encourage this board to rethink this policy and make it an unlimited time. Historically, you don't have many that will come and make public comments. And when many of us do, it's likely because we feel very passionate about something that possibly needs to change. Given the circumstances we're now facing, public comments are more important than ever. Some of us have spent hours dedicated to thinking up solutions for making things better for our kids. We've poured over the numbers, looked at other districts, and met together to find solace and commonality as parents who just want what is best for our kids in our district. As your constituents who elected you, you do have a duty to listen to us, work with us, and work for our children.
In order for this board to gain the trust and respect from the parents of this school district, the biggest and most effective action that you can take as a board is to listen to those who know our students best, the parents. When we come to you and tell you our kids are struggling and we tell you where things can improve, please listen to us. As parents, we oftentimes struggle to help our kids, and when they are in the care of someone else 8 hours a day, we need to know that someone is on our team and listening to our concerns. It hasn't felt that way, and that is a big reason why many struggle with trusting the actions of this administration. That can and should be your next step in partnering with parents. Only then will you garner the trust that I know that you're seeking from your community. The next item I'd like to briefly mention is the issue of stating our address each time we come up to speak. I, as well as many others, would like this requirement dropped. We do already fill out our address on the sign-up sheet in order to speak. There are safety issues that many have concerns about, such as protective orders that are in place to keep victims of abuse safe. Many are concerned as our addresses should not be publicized, especially seeing that these meetings are posted on YouTube and can be shared publicly. I would ask that this requirement to share this personal information be eliminated from future meetings. Thank you.
Mr. John Mulling.
My name is John Mulling, 3850 South Pole. I agree with that woman there perfectly. That should not be on there for possible vindictive reasons. Did I say my address? Yeah. Okay. Last week, the board voted 6-2 for the updated COVID plan. Noah Lee and Brendan Burns voted no. I would like to request both of you to respond in writing through the minutes of this meeting or in an email to me the following 2 things, because this is the most important thing you've made a decision on in the last 2 years. You need to go on the record. First, I want both of you to why you voted no. And second, what would have been your proposal to replace the one that was passed? The public deserves an answer from both of you. This is the most important decision in 2 weeks. And you guys kind of punted. The public deserves to know where you stand on the issue. I'd also like to thank you for making that decision. You guys know where I feel. You know where I felt a year ago with all the stats I brought to you. Last week, there was one person with an N95 in here. Well, N95 is wonderful, but unless you're properly fitted for an N95, you aren't getting as much protection as you get. You're supposed to get properly fitted. You can't just toss an N95 and say, hey, I'm 95% protected. I just want to remind you to make you feel a little better about your decision. The quote I made about November. I want to remind you about a Johns Hopkins study at Sloan Kettering got together 2 doctors. And as of November 9th, they did a study. There were 28 million children in the United States between 5 and 11 years old. 94 of those people died of COVID, those kids, 94. The percentage of dying from COVID in that age group was 1 in a million. More kids died of the flu than COVID. So I think it was an excellent decision. Pretty much that's all I want to say tonight. I just want to remind, again, Noah and Brendan, I would appreciate very much a written response. The public deserves to know how you feel and how you stand on this position. You need to let us know how you feel and where you're going, because this subject might come up again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Deidre Ray. She's online, Brandon.
I'm on Zoom. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. I also wanted to, Deidre Ray, 1027 South 110th Street, West Dallas. I also wanted to just back what Carolina said in the 2 teachers, that I agree that teachers who stick with us for 30 years deserve early retirement. And I agree with everything that they said about that. What I wanted to touch on even more so was what Deidre was talking about. And I appreciate that you guys looked into what is stated on the DPI reports. But what I wanted to talk about was what we can do more. So every school went through the same two tough times as us. They managed to maintain their academic standing with little to no decrease, yet we have dropped approximately 32% in comparison to our own selves where we were prior. I feel that this shows a direct reflection on the decisions made by our administration not being in the best interest of our children or their educational needs. Every district around us stayed around or at the same level that they were at prior to, yet we dropped significantly. And I don't mean this in a way to compare us to others. I know what everybody says about apples to apples, but I'm just trying to show that blaming COVID isn't accurate. We all dealt with COVID. And their education was put first and not politics, which I think needs to change in our district. We are finally at a point where we are moving forward, but momentum takes time to show effectiveness. I understand that the learning plan that was put in place was making upward trends in our school, in our children's academics, and that's fantastic, but something happened to cause the drastic decrease. You can blame COVID, you can blame virtual learning. I think it had more to do with the administration, but either way, it needs to be met with a more aggressive plan than just going back to what we were doing. We first need to get back to that higher standard of education that we were at before we can relax into what we were doing to maintain it. Just throwing ideas out there, and I posted this online, that what if we did something where a teen asset group was involved and they could bridge this gap instead of private tutors that some people can't afford. It would offer the high school students who do well in school the opportunity to help those in lower grade levels where they struggle. And in return, it would be something beneficial to those higher grade levels who are doing well and help them on resumes or college applications. There are other programs in place within our district that are put in place for other types of careers. Maybe this could be something for those who want to become educators or teachers. And maybe it's not feasible, and who knows. But I think it's important that we focus on catching these kids up, and they shouldn't have been left behind in this gap that was created. Thank you.
Very much. That's the last person that I have signed up for public comments this evening. As I usually do, I'll just wait an extra 30 seconds or so if there's anyone who just joined the meeting remotely who would like to sign up. All right, well, not seeing anyone else sign up, I will close public comments at this time. And we'll move on to item 8, our board reports. Starting first with item 8.1, review of the board calendar. So today is Monday, February 28th. We have a regular Board of Education meeting, immediately followed by a workshop on pupil count, 2022-23 enrollment projections, estimate of revenue limit calculation, and preliminary budget projections. On Thursday, March 3rd at 6 p.m., we have our first community information session on our upcoming referendum. This will be a virtual session, and there is a link available on our website, as well as that will be going out to our constituencies. On Monday, March 7th at 6 p.m., we have our second community information session about the upcoming referendum, and this one will be in person at West Allis Central High School cafeteria. On Monday, March 14th at 6 p.m., we have our next regular Board of Education meeting, immediately followed by a workshop on special education services. Then on Wednesday, March 16th at 6 p.m., we have our third community information session on the referendum that will be held at Nathan Hale High School auditorium. Then on Monday, March 21st at 6 p.m., we have a closed session meeting with Superintendent Dr. Lexman. And Monday, March 28th at 6 p.m., we have our regular Board of Education meeting. And then Thursday, on March 31st at 6 p.m., we have our fourth community information session on the upcoming referendum. This last one will be virtual as well. So moving on to board reports, 8.2.1, employee engagement and culture. Mr. Keller.
Thank you. We met on 2/15 and covered about 3 different topics. The first of which was stay interviews. That's something that we've been trying to get some more information on in terms of possibly having those implemented within the district. Along a similar line, we are gathering some exit interview information, and we should have a summary of some of that info at our next meeting. We also talked about substitute recruitment and retention. There was a wage increase that went into effect in January. And as of February 14th, we had added 10 new substitutes. Staff is actually working on an orientation and handbook for the 22-23 academic yearbook, and also working with the communications team to recognize some of our substitutes. We also did an update regarding the new compensation model. Again, the goal of that was to bring to average compensation for professional staff. The spirit and intent was to align internally so salaries are equitable within smaller groups and to move us toward average teacher salary in our region. Some of the highlights we found out was that the end result was that 52% of our professionals did receive a wage increase. Returning professional staff did also receive their CPI increase. We had 83 members of the professional staff that participated in the micro-credential program. And we also found that new teachers were a bit more likely to receive a wage adjustment based on these new parameters than some of the more experienced veteran teachers.
All right.
And that's it. We'll be meeting again in March.
All right. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Keller or the committee, or anything to be considered at their next meeting? No?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Move on to item 8.2.2, financial stability and efficiency. Ms. Carr.
This will be short and sweet. The committee met on Thursday, February 17th. The first agenda item was an update on the early retirement proposal. And because this is action item for tonight, I will let Mark Duff explain the findings and the recommendations because we're going to be dealing with that soon. The next item on the agenda was the ESSER funding update, and this information was shared at the last Monday's workshop. And the last item on the agenda was the budget update, and this information will be presented tonight at the board workshop. So I certainly didn't want to repeat or steal your thunder. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. Does anyone have any questions for Jane of the committee or anything that they would like to have considered at their next meeting? Seeing none. Thank you very much for both of you for the board reports. We'll move on to 8.3 board member reports of community events. Does anyone have any events they attended like to talk about? Ms. Deal?
All right, so on Sunday, February 20th, I just want to say a big thank you to the West Dallas West Milwaukee PTA Council. They had their Founders Day Carnival. We actually had, the theme was all around the world. So we did have students and faculty from both Central and Hale that came and provided activities for the kids and had a piñata, and it was really cool. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of them, all the parents, all the students, everybody that showed up for the Founders Day Carnival. And then kind of adding on to what Deidre said earlier, my son was able to participate in the solo and ensemble, the music festival this past Saturday. So I just wanted to say thanks to all the volunteers, a lot of volunteers, a lot of our music program, our music staff were there. So I just wanted to thank everybody that came out and made that a success. So.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Anyone else have any other events they'd like to talk about? Ms. Kaiser?
I also attended the PTA Carnival, but in capacity of sharing about our referendum, but I can also speak to the fact that it was so wonderful to see folks out and about. The kids had a really great time. I also was very lucky to attend the WMSA String Festival. On Saturday, I was there in the capacity of also speaking about the referendum. We've had exceptionally wonderful responses to talking to the public about what we're actually planning to do here. And it was really nice to talk to folks. I'll be attending tomorrow night, the West Dallas Common Council meeting. But I also want to say it was great as a former musician, reliving my glory days 20 years ago. It was wonderful to see the students out there, and hearing them perform was just an absolute joy. And we have some amazing talent in this district that even just sing in the hallway, I was telling poor Noah about my glory days in the pep band. So it was wonderful. And I'm thrilled that the arts are back and they're able to do this again.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. I was happy to hear those stories. Anything else that they would like, any other board members like to bring up? All right, I'll just echo all the comments that Ms. Teal and Ms. Kaiser have made. I was also able to attend the PTA Carnival as well as Solo Ensemble. My son performed as well. So thank you to all the volunteers, all the people who put their time and energies into planning these events and making sure they go off without a hitch. Thank you so much for that and taking time out of your already busy days to be able to help our students and help our families to be able to hopefully achieve whatever they want to do. So thank you so much for all that. And it was a great time as well by me. All right, so that we'll move on to our consent agenda. So we have 4 things on the agenda this evening. Item 9.1, the approval of minutes from our regular board meeting on February 14th, as well as our board work session and special meeting on February 21st. We have the employment summary at item 9.2. Item 9.3 are supplementary contracts, and item 9.4 are financial summary. Does anyone need anything separated out? If not, I would look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Let's move on to our action item this evening, just one, 10.1, early retirement proposal for teachers and at-will employees. Mr. Duff and Ms. Windler, welcome back.
Yay.
Welcome.
Well, I had the privilege of working with Caitlin for several days, like a couple of days a week, once a week. So it was fun to work with her to get her back and ready. So she did work with me on this early retirement proposal, which was kind of a fun little project for us. And so we have discussed that at the work session. And I did provide some documents to you, or the workshop. Work session is a bad old term, but I did provide a summary to you. And in this document, it highlights some of the cost review by the actuary. And it includes some of the documents that we would be using as kind of the guidelines for providing the benefits. And in addition, Mr. Sikich asked for a breakdown of how some of the staff and work, how it broke out. So I made a table, and it's the back of the packet that broke down like the at-will employees versus the professional educators and how many in each different year and which plan they'd be eligible for. So overall, one of the other changes that we did make at the meeting, we were discussing whether we would propose a lower percentage for retirees to pay for their health coverage. After reviewing how the implementation of the plan and discussing it with the superintendent and others, that we thought that we would maintain it at 90%. The way it works is that after a certain period of time, the contribution amount is frozen, and then the retiree pays a higher level as the cost increases. So we felt that amount would be, for some of these retirees, they'll be retired for a period of time, and that provision will kick in and they would be paying more anyway. So we felt that was reasonable to keep it simple, keep the current system in place that other retirees have. So we continue to recommend it at that 90% level. So otherwise, do you have any questions from the materials that were provided? Otherwise, we have had a recommendation is to approve.
Questions? No questions? We're all good? All right, well, if there's no questions, then I look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Last chance. Questions, comments?
I will have to recuse myself from this vote, I believe.
Yes. All right. No further comments, no further questions. All those in favor? Opposed? That passes. And one recusal. Okay, thank you very much. Congratulations. All right, we'll move on then right to our workshop.
11.1 financial stability and efficiency pupil count. There's a number of things here. I'm not going to read them all, but it's the workshop.
The workshop.
All right, so I will get us started. Erin's passing out a handout, so I just wanted to say hi and thanks for keeping things moving, and I'm excited to be back. So I just wanted to extend a thank you, first of all, for Erin and Mark's work on this presentation, which obviously there's a bunch of work behind the scenes that goes into this for weeks and months at a time, and especially particularly from Mark holding down the fort too for the last few months. He's been a rock star, and I'm so grateful that he was able to step in and serve as interim. So the workshop we'll go through tonight has a number of factors that we always refer to as puzzle pieces to our budget each year. They all work together in maintaining our projections for next year in terms of our budget and our schools. And also it's important to look at them as puzzle pieces because we work with them together to maintain our financial stability. So just our agenda for tonight, we'll go through membership and enrollment trends, and then what those two terms mean in terms of definitions, and then what they mean in terms of our fiscal impact. We'll go through our revenue limit calculation, which you can never go through too many times because it's very complicated. So we try to boil it down to terms that help us all remember what the main pieces of the calculation are. And then we'll talk through our staffing projections and our budget projections. So we'll begin with our definitions, the two main definitions that we kind of throw out throughout this presentation, and they're different and they're important. It's important to know the difference. So those two terms are our membership and our enrollment. So membership you're seeing represented by the blue bars in this. Nope. Membership is represented by the orange line in this model. And the orange line is our 3-year resident membership. So membership is our resident students. Those are students who live in our West Dallas, West Milwaukee, and there are portions of Greenfield and New Berlin within our communities. And that's the portion that's affecting our revenue limit calculation. So the 3-year membership average is what is the factor that's used in our calculation. And that's again, resident students. So membership is resident students, and then enrollment is represented by the blue bars in this graph. And our enrollment is what drives our staffing. Enrollment is our students in seats. So enrollment drives staffing, and all those pieces work together as we plan for our budget moving forward.
Okay, so this is something that I shared with the FSC committee meeting. And so this is kind of tries to help you see the math of how it ends up calculating the revenue for the district and what we're facing. So the fiscal impacts of membership enrollment, there's 3 different categories that it can impact. One is the revenue the district receives. So that is calculated through the revenue limit. So membership impacts the revenue limit. Hopefully I didn't run out of my battery.
You keep talking, I'll grab my adapter. Sorry.
Okay. The membership impacts the state revenue limit, but it also impacts our state equalization aid. So while the revenue limit allows how much we can spend as a district, the equalization aid is how much aid we get from the state. So the higher our enrollment is, the more aid we get, which is used for tax relief for the district. So that is a fairly important aspect of how membership enrollment impacts our revenue. Another major contributor to another aspect is enrollment is used, and I think Erin plays a role in this, is enrollment impacts how much it helps us project staffing at the schools. So it's a major aspect of staffing. Obviously, the amount of students you need impacts how many teaching staff you need. So that's a very important aspect for how we use enrollment for that. Then finally, there's another part of it. Enrollment is part of our open enrollment system is also impacting, impacts enrollment, and it helps us determine how many open enrollment seats we have and some of those areas. So one of the things that I did on that table, you can see the trend. over that period of time, 2018-19 to what we're projecting for 22-23, will be a loss of 663 students. And then for the future projections, and I think Aaron went over this like a month or two ago in January, we are projecting even more students to be lost in future years. So this all impacts all these categories of revenue, staffing, and open enrollment.
One of the areas to mention on the loss is that's membership. So those are the number of students, even students who've left our district, that are counted in membership. So those aren't, the membership loss isn't just students leaving our district. Those students are counted in membership. So it's an overall larger picture of just less students living in the communities. And that's a national, a state out, that's a trend that the whole country is seeing. So
that's exactly right. All districts are facing the issue of declining enrollment. So one of the things I did at the FSC committee meeting was just to do the simple math. So for every student we are on our membership, the district gets about $10,500 per student. So if you, in addition, we get per pupil funding. This is of $742 per student. So the district's been facing declining numbers of students. So if you do the math and multiply it out, it shows you about how much we would have to reduce to meet the revenue limit. So in other times, if you have increasing enrollment, it's the opposite, you gain enrollment. But so for the short term, for the next year, we have a fairly small impact from the revenue limit. We expect to lose about 35 students, which isn't too bad. But the way the state revenue limit works, it's a 3-year average. So we're still paying, and I don't know if paying is the right term, but we're still impacted by that 3-year average from the year previously. If you go back, you can see there was a significant decline in the COVID year of about 585 students. So we still have because of the 3-year average, we're still reducing our costs for that drop in 585 student drop in that year. But then if you look at the longer term trends, the long-term trend at the bottom, if we, well, for the whole range of fiscal year 18 to fiscal year 25, it'll be about a 1,355 student drop. That's about a $15 million in reductions the district will have to make in that lengthy period of time. And so that is why we have to continuously be diligent in being more efficient. The state financial school financing system requires us to be efficient based on what our enrollment and membership is. So hopefully this math helps you show the challenges that we have.
And so this table here just kind of represents, and I know we had gone through this about a month ago, it represents kind of how we come up with the level of efficiency that Mark was referring to. And as you can see, if I just click back here to this table, you can see the bottom column that says fiscal year 22 to 25. That's kind of what we were facing here over the next 3 years. But if you look to the fiscal year 18 to 25, we're already in the middle of that, right? So the fact that that says $15.23 million of reduction, and the fact that we're sitting here today looking at over the next 3 years, only 4 of that shows that this process here works, right? It's keeping us efficient. It uses our enrollment to dictate how much staff we need, and having these processes in place through, calculation of open enrollment by trying to retain students on waivers, it does work. And so this is the table that we went through a month ago for open enrollment. These are the seats that will open up here at the end of April. Open enrollment is up and live, and it concludes at the last Monday, April.
So open enrollment also is both a cost and a revenue to the district. So this is just quantifying that dollar amount. So for every student that we either receive in or goes out, the tuition amount is $8,161, and special education tuition is a little bit higher based on cost. So Our total tuition revenue that we receive for students coming into the district for the 731 students is about over $6 million. We have a higher amount of students leaving the district, so that's about almost $11 million cost. So the net open enrollment impact is a cost of $4.67 million. But it's worth noting is that we are able to levy $10,500. So we have a higher amount of revenue limit money for those students than we have for our cost or the revenue. So.
I'm just going to add a piece just to kind of bring it back to the calculation of the revenue limit. So we talked about the revenue limit is a 3-year average. So for each student, these are open enrollment out students, but they're still residents. They live here and they go elsewhere. So we get to count them in a revenue limit, which is why Mark's referring to a revenue limit. But remember that a revenue limit, when we talk about membership, it's a 3-year average. That means we get to count 1/3 of that kid each year. So it's in different time periods. So it's not like we're just getting 10,500 and then paying out the 8161. So just it adds another layer of complication to our revenue limit and our funding formulas.
And so of the total of the 12, 33 that we see open and roll out, that number does fluctuate year to year, but it's generally been in that range for a few years now. The majority of those students, contrary to some assumptions, about 800 of those students attend Milwaukee, and primarily in grades K to 8. And so when we do a lot of these calculations here, I talk a lot about how we see many students come back in grades 6 through 9, 10th, 11th grade, because that's typically what happens when a lot of the families who open and roll out choose to come back. So I think, and we've kind of talked internally about this is an opportunity, I think, as we move forward with, especially with facility consolidation and getting more information back in terms of services we can offer to try to attract more families to maybe opt back into our schools earlier rather than later. So, and just kind of building off that, so how we determine staffing needs for next year, we take the projected enrollments and we use the section size and sections required to determine staff. And that's broken down by each school. And we roll that forward every year. And this is the kind of the grid that we use. And as similar to the discussion we had a month ago, we fill our sections to the 92%. And that is broken down in our elementaries by grade, because our grades in 4K, the student to staff ratio is obviously different than what we would like in grades 5. So as a whole, we look to fill our elementaries to 22 students per teacher as an average, and then our secondaries to 27 as a class. And so if in any grade we don't fill that, so if our average in kindergarten was 17 and we had 10 sections, we could take 1 student per section, and then our open enrollment number would be 10 for 4K. And that kind of math is what we use to determine the open enrollment seats. And so some of the strategies that we look to use in terms of balancing a budget is first of all, which is the number one thing we're talking about, is kind of responding to declining enrollment and looking at what schools and trying to run efficient staffing models as we can. And the second thing that we're working on now is developing a vacancy review process to that way when someone does retire or resigns or seeks other employment, is to take a really close look at what position is that, and is that something that we can fill internally, as opposed to submitting reduction of force. That's kind of the ideal, not letting staff go, but trying to fill these positions internally if there needs to be a reduction. Mark already talked about early retirement. That's a strategy we're looking at using to try to be more efficient with staffing and finances. We have the AGR reduction strategy, which we've gone through, and you have the paper here we'll talk about in a second. And really the goal overall is to address these issues through attrition, not through reduction. And we want to keep our staff, and if people are going to retire and we can fill that internally, that is the best possible way to do that.
And some of the goals are embodied in the board's policy of reduction in force too. So those are some of the strategies that we take into consideration. And there is some future planning involved with this because we are planning there are work groups and there's planning going on with school consolidation as well. So some of these vacancy review processes that we won't automatically fill a vacancy. We will have a process in place to review the need so that we can meet some of our goals and targets.
So this table, I handed it out. I feel like it's easier to see and read in front of you as opposed to on the screen. So this is the overview of the the staff in terms of enrollment for next year. So on the far left column, you have the schools. And then as you move from left to right, each column kind of helps tell you the story, right? So, each school, and then you have the next column is their current staff this year. And then they were staffed on the projected enrollment for this year, right? The following column is what the enrollment actually came in at. TFS is third Friday enrollment. So we staff schools based on the projection, but then part of the projection for the following year is to review what the enrollment came in at by school, okay? And so as you can see, I just use Franklin, it's the top row. It's just the easiest to kind of proceed through the equation. So Franklin has 12 staff. Their projected enrollment was 248. Their actual enrollment came in at 231. And their projected enrollment is at 223. So, you go, oh, the third Friday enrollment was 231. The projected is 223. It's only 8 students. How come the required sections is 10? Well, it's because their enrollment or their staff was based on the 248, right? So it's really a decline of 25 students. So based off the model of filling the average to 22, at 223, the required sections would be 10, which would give you 22.3 students at Franklin Elementary, which would show you an initial staff decline for next year at that school of 2, right? And in the green, this shows you kind of the AGR philosophical approach that we've applied from last year moving forward to try to use some of the dollars we get for AGR to apply that to retain staff and lower class sizes. So as you can see in the green, as you move across, it says required sections plus AGR staff. That would be 12, which would maintain the current staff at Franklin, and which would give you 2 sections of AGR. And so at the bottom where you see the initial change in staff, -2, -5, -7, at the bottom, it shows a subtraction of -37. And as you look to the right, it shows you change in staff with AGR 8 and then plus 29. So essentially, we would be looking at having 29 sections of AGR next year. We need to reduce 37. We're gonna have 29 sections of AGR. So 37 less 29 is 8. So the reduction for next year in terms of staffing is 8 staff. Yep.
Do you want to hold questions at the end, or can I ask questions?
No.
So when it comes to the AGR staff, what is the criteria for determining that we're going to keep X amount for AGR in X school? Because because Forest Man has 7, for instance, and other elementary schools have less.
Right.
And so what is the criteria to determine that we're going to put more AGR sections in one section versus another?
Each AGR funding is on a per school basis. So that's ultimately the reason.
Okay.
Is the amount of dollars that are allocated to that school based on the AGR formula, which is state driven. It's not our own internal formula. So we are told how much money we get for each school.
Okay.
And then this number is the dollar amount that fits in there. And then Aaron talked through a little bit in the next slide as well, this idea of float. He'll go into what this means, but we have an AGR carryover. So this means from previous years, if we haven't spent the full allocation each year, we have a chunk of these dollars that we refer to as AGR carryover, which we can utilize and are utilized in these formulas. So some of these numbers aren't sustainable forever and ever, indefinitely, but can be sustained for a few years utilizing these carryover dollars. And again, they're based on each school's calculation, the calculation of AGR. Each school gets that individual amount based on that formula.
Okay, thank you.
So then to go to the next page, which I handed out as well. So No, as Caitlin kind of mentioned, not all, we have carryover in AGR funding by school that I guess proceeds back a few years. So we were looking at trying to accomplish two things. One, retain staff as best we can, and two, use up the funds. So what's the best way to do that? We reviewed that and said if we can reduce class sizes in elementaries, in grades K through 3, that'd be great, or K through 2, that'd be great. So let's look at trying to do that. And so what we started looking at was, because not all of the funds are going to be sustainable to do this forever, to keep this many sections, right? So we developed this idea of a float, right? So how many sections are each school able to float? And should someone resign or someone retire, we would look at not filling that position because it's a float. It's not sustainable to maintain. So what we have here, this table, this is elementary only, and it shows you, similar to the last table, it shows you their current staff, the required number of sections that they need to fill or to maintain a building average of 22. And then it shows you the number of AGR sections they have this year, how many we're looking at allocating next year, and then the net change in staff, the sustainable number, and then the sections floated. So Franklin's the first example as always here. So they have 12 staff. We would need 10 based on their enrollment. This year we have 1 AGR section. Next year we're suggesting that we have 2 due to the AGR funding, which results in a net change of staff of 0, right? That was what we looked at in the last table. The sustainable number for Franklin year to year is 2, and the sections float is 1. So what that means is, should someone at Franklin retire or resign, we would not fill that, but we would still have 2 AGR staff, meaning we'd have 11 teachers at Franklin, 9 of them would not be AGR and 2 would be. And what that does is it allows us to have 2 of the 11 be grant funded and 9 of them come out of Fund 10, hence reducing the amount of money that we would need to fund out of the general fund. Am I saying that correctly? Yep. Yeah. So that's kind of the strategy that I think in conjunction with the 8 staff that we would, due to declining enrollment at the middle school, right? The number for sections floated is 14. That certainly doesn't mean that we'll have 14 staff at the right schools all retire or find other employment, but it's certainly a model to be able to keep staff that we have. And if someone does leave, part of the vacancy review process to evaluate that to kind of stay in line with what we're trying to do.
So budget projections. So now, so overall budget projections for 22-23, we used a model system from Baird to do a multi-year forecast. And you have to, in order to do a forecast, you put in assumptions. So we usually start out a fairly conservative assumptions, which would be, basically just rolling over the prior year base and then making certain adjustments. So we do know right away, the state has provided us with no increase at all in per pupil funding. So for next year. So that's a $0 increase because of the 2-year budget, the way it's set up. We did include the declining enrollment as per the projections that Aaron and we've shared with you. But one of the things we did not include in the base, this assumption, is we did not make the staffing adjustments. We did include the current CPI for compensation increase is 4.7%. Noting that the board still needs to take action on that. So, but that's what the state provided as the CPI. The health benefit increase, we put in at 8%. It could be higher or lower, but the health benefit increase is at that level. And as I mentioned, we did assume minor adjustments to departmental and other types of service costs. And then we did, as mentioned in the ESSER presentation, at this point, we were trying to minimize, it does not anticipate the use of ESSER funding to directly reduce the shortfall. So we put this together and then, so now we have the amount. So I always say that we always review these with caution. This is a guideline, it's our initial goals of what we should meet, but it's within what you dealing with in the past. So we are anticipating declining enrollment is generating a reduction in our revenue limit of about $2.6 million. That's the main contributor to a revenue reduction next year. In addition, expenditures are expected to increase a little less than $1 million. So overall, that comes up to about a $3.2 million shortfall that we'll have to address. So that is the challenge we have before us. Any questions in this area? And we do have planning in process and a pathway to achieving a balanced budget for the next year. So as Aaron was mentioning, we've identified processes for having efficiencies with our staffing. We'll make FTE adjustments based on need in that review process. That'll also be impacted by the retirements and also the early retirement plan that we have. But a lot of this is driven by declining enrollment. So we will have a savings in the staffing area. One of the things we are planning on doing is this year we received per pupil aid from federal aid from Governor Evers was able to put together about $1 million in aid. Instead of using that this year, we were planning to use it next year. So that was one of the things that would help reduce that shortfall. In addition, we discussed last week, Caitlin and I were working on a debt reduction plan so that that will also help us out, and we could use some ESSER funds and other funds to develop a plan for consideration, and that will help with the budget shortfall. In addition, we just have to continue to scrutinize all the budget line items, develop efficiencies and strategies. And Caitlin, do you have anything to add to that?
No. So this is the point where we start looking, so we're high level and we start getting into the nitty gritty, going through each of our department budgets and our school budgets and our staff and salary and benefit budgets, and eventually work towards a balanced budget. So each year at this point in time for the last number of years, we've been right about the same point. So about a $3 million-ish deficit. So nothing that we haven't seen before. And we intend fully to come to a balanced budget before we approve in October. And then one thing that Mark's worked on, which we'll review in a second here, is, so we're talking 2022-23, but it's important to look into the future. And when we talk about using these federal funds, those are one-time funds, just like our ESSER funds are one-time funds. These funds from Governor Evers that he allocated from federal funds down to school districts in the state of Wisconsin are one-time funds. And we can utilize those. And this graph that Mark will talk through shows what that does when we utilize those. And this depiction of our 5-year forecast, I think, is really impactful, just looking at it in a visual sense of what it means if we don't address these deficits each year. And we have been doing that. And we've come to a balanced budget each year and have ended in a really great place the last number of years. So Mark can talk through this graph.
So this is a 5-year forecast. And so one of the things the different colors are is we already identified the 22-23 shortfall that we're well on our way towards planning to address. But in the following years, there are impacts. So you can see in 23-24, I have the red and the orange, so that Governor Evers funding is one-time money. So that is one time, it goes away. So then that actually creates a shortfall in 23-24 for us to resolve. So the red line indicates what the shortfall would be, but I also included the green area, which is the state typically provides a per pupil funding adjustment. They didn't do it during those last 2 years, but they usually give us a couple $100 per student. So this assumes that the state will give us a per pupil funding increase. If they do not, our budget deficit here will balloon by that $1.5 million. So that's I think assuming a $200 per pupil adjustment. The state really should give us about $800 in a per pupil adjustment, and that would significantly help us in our deficits over the next several years. But that's what that's reflecting. So the green is if the state gives us what they typically do with the per pupil increase, it'll help us. But if they don't, the deficit will grow even greater. And then the one in 24-25, we do have some ESSER funding that is paying for some of our base costs, like lease payments for our technology plan. So once that ESSER funding expires in that year, that will be some additional challenges the district will have to find funding for. So that does add to that deficit, but it's far enough out that it can be planned for and worked on. So that's why we're trying to be careful about recommending use of ESSER funding in a way that adds to our deficit rather than maybe what we're trying to devise is one that helps with our fiscal structural deficit.
So to summarize this, two main points, I hope I don't forget them before I get to them. One, each of these bars assumes we've balanced the budget the previous year. So in the 23-24 bar, that assumes we've balanced our budget and we've reduced our expenses or gotten $3.2 million more in revenue. So each of these, if we didn't, then the next bar would be that much bigger.
So the other thing is that the district's in planning for some school consolidations, and those efficiencies and savings are in some of those out years, which it will further help us be more efficient and address some of those anticipated shortfalls in those years. So we are doing some strong financial fiscal management over a multi-year period, looking out into the future. So this is, I believe, from somebody who's only been here a few months, but this is good work you're doing to manage your finances and be looking in the long term. And so I think that's something you should be proud of.
And my second point was that this is us planning for the future and maintaining our financial stability. Us talking about a deficit does not mean that we're, like Mark said, doing something wrong. This is us addressing and balancing our budget each year. So again, we talked through our revenue limit and our resident membership, our students who live within our school boundaries. So this is us balancing our budget and maintaining our financial stability moving forward. Any questions?
Any questions, comments? I have one. I know AGR is a grant. It's 5 years. Is this, I know we don't know for certain, when does this round end? And do we know if it will be always continue?
Yep, I believe our current year, 21-22 is the first year of the 5-year period.
Okay.
So we've got 4 additional years and we don't anticipate that it would change or end.
Okay.
There's nothing that would point to that.
We would just have to reapply it as long
Yep,
as we
just like
show.
we just did this period.
Okay. All right.
That AGR achievement gap reduction, and it replaced what used to be SAGE, and so those dollars are associated based on the number of students at each one of the sites that qualify for free and reduced lunch. So it is the state's plan to help close gaps, and then we get Title I money, which is the federal plan to help close some of those gaps of students that come from backgrounds. So it would be highly unlikely that the state wouldn't have a program like that. For the long term, it probably just continues to take different forms and have different requirements for us.
The name might change, but.
Yeah.
And the forms I fill out.
I can almost
might
guarantee
change,
you
but
the name will
yes,
change.
the likelihood is that the state will continue down.
Right.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much for all this work, and Mr. Duff, want to specifically thank you for filling in for Caitlin while she was away. It was really nice working with you while you were here, and you've definitely brought a lot of knowledge to the district. I think that was great in helping out while she was away. So I hope you're not going to go too far because it's great having you around and everything, but wanted to formally thank you for the work you've done here for us.
Well,
Thank you.
so
I
much.
appreciated the opportunity. It was actually kind of fun. And I appreciate the opportunity. I won't be going too far, but I don't live that far away. so.
Well, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. Thank you
You're
so
gonna
much.
stop it.
So at this point, because we have to, I'm gonna ask for an adjournment of this part, and then we have to reconvene as a committee of the whole. So we'll do an adjournment and then have a 5-minute recess and then come back as committee of the whole. So could I get a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we are adjourned. 5 minutes. Reconvene as committee of the whole with a second, and then we'll do a roll call vote.
Motion to what?
Reconvene as the committee of the whole.
Motion to reconvene as the committee of the whole.
Second.
All right, roll call, please.
Is this a yes or a here?
This is just who's present, yeah.
Okay.
So Mrs. Carr,
Here.
Mr. Burns,
Present.
Mr. Eustruck,
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser,
Here.
Mr. Keller,
Here.
Mrs. Justin is excused, Ms. Seal,
Here.
Mr. Sickich is excused, and President Lee.
Here. All right. All right, Dr. Lutzman.
Great, thank you. So what you have in front of you as a committee of the whole is the first reading of board policy updates. So these are the July 2021 updates that we're still trying to get caught up to. We did work through these in workshop and gathered some feedback from board members. In particular, we changed all of the non-discrimination policy language following the statement, gender, including transgender. And that was advised by our consultant from Neola as appropriate, even though gender is considered to be, from the federal language, all inclusive. It is a little bit even more inclusive to state including transgender. So we've made those changes. That was really the extent of changes. Just a point of order, I suppose, that the board would not be approving the technical corrections because in current bylaws, I have the authority to make technical corrections, but the board has to be informed, right? So this is the way to inform the board so you can see them if there are any questions. But it's really just approving the other updates and the big ones in this update are the non-discrimination language. If there are any other things, this is the moment to raise them with this round of updates in the first reading, so we can adjust before the second reading. It comes back again before the regular board, not the committee of the whole, to approve as the second reading in a month, right? So it gets held in committee. So you're serving as that committee where it's held for 30 days. That's really more part of the public process. The public has questions, but it's also the opportunity if the board wants to make any other additional recommendations, we can consult, adjust, and bring those back in 30 days. I should also add that assuming the board approves the first and the second reading a month from now, you'll very quickly see the next round of updates. So we're going to do this again right away so we get caught up to the cycle because we do have, well, Suzette has updates to deal with, sorry, for January of 2022. So that's where we are and trying to keep up with our Neola policy process.
So no changes except for the transgender, adding in any questions or comments you guys have about this, any additional things you saw when you're going through that you wanted to have addressed between our first and second readings of these? No, all good. All right, well, I look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any last minute discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, first reading's passed. And that's our last thing. So now I look for a real motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.